welcome to another Mansion interview. My mum and dad were only children during the Second World War, but they still remember a lot, and I thought it would be interesting to ask them a few questions. Here's another Mansion interview from mansioningles.com. Harry and Francis speaking about World War II. You can do a listening comprehension exercise and check difficult vocabulary from this listening at inglespodcast.com. How old were you during the war?
Well, when war started, which was in 1939, I was 8.
Was this the First World War? Or...
No.
Pardon?
No.
How would you like a thick lip?
I was 7.
And where were you when...
It was 1939 to 1945 war.
And where were you when war broke out?
Probably in school.
Well, no, we because it was on a Sunday. Actually, war was declared on a Sunday. And I can remember when I was that age, I had a friend. And his father was a wholesale potato merchant. And he used to supply all the area with potatoes, obviously. And he had this sort of warehouse at the end of the road, which was most probably 300, 400 bags of potatoes. And his son and I used to go in there and play. We used to make castles out of the sacks and all that sort of business. And I can remember when the sirens, because there was a siren that used to sound to warn everybody that the enemy was coming, whether it was planes or whatever. And when the first siren sounded, it was basically a testing of them. And I can always remember my mother screaming my name out because I was in this chap's warehouse playing on the potatoes, the sacks of potatoes, and she didn't know where I was. And
Can I say something?
What?
When the war broke out, how could you have been 8 and I was 7 if we were both the same age?
Well, you see, the point is this. When I think you
39.
Can I say...
The war started in 1939 and I was born in 1931, which would make me 8.
Right. Well, I was born in 1932. Now, I was 7 years when my father passed away, got killed. And that was in 1938. And that was a year before the war started. So what we said, I was 8 then, when the war started.
You must have been the same age as me, yes.
And did your dad get killed in the war?
No, he got killed a year before the war started. He was working in a power station, and it was a freak accident. A crane swung round and pinned him against the wall and virtually crushed all the bones in his body. But that was in 1938, a year before the war started.
And what do you remember about when the war broke out?
I don't remember anything. I've got bad memory. Probably it's just erased it from my mind. I don't even remember where I was.
Did you stay in London?
No, I was evacuated. They sent me to 2 or 3 different places to go away from London because of the bombs. I went to Cheltenham. I went to Surrey.
Did you go by yourself? Were you alone?
No, I went with an aunt of mine, Ivor's mother.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't know each other then?
Oh no, of course not.
No.
And where did you go?
Yeah, the strange thing about it, we were 1,000,000 miles apart. We were only 5 minutes walk from each other's house.
So the same thing happened to you? You got sent out of London?
No. What happened with us was that my mother kept us until the bombs started to fall, until Germany started dropping bombs on London. Up until then, about 6 months, possibly 9 months, I don't know how long, factually, but as soon as the bomb started, I can always remember that where we lived at the time wasn't too far from the docks, and the essence of the bombing was basically to put the docks out of work. In other words, so that we would starve to death, if you want. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when they started dropping bombs on the docks, those bombs was falling on where we were living, which was a street called Skidmore Street in East London. And I can always remember, because we had no shelter at the time, we used to go and sit underneath the stairs of the house. Because the strange thing about a house that's bombed, or a house that's, if you like, broken up due to an earthquake, there's always one thing that will be left standing, is the staircase of the house. I don't know why, and nobody can answer it, but it's always the same. Every house that was bombed, the staircase was always there, it was always left intact.
I think why I got sent away was because we got bombed out of our house. We had street shelters in the street made of bricks, and we used to spend the nights there. And our house was just outside the street shelters. And one morning we came out when the all clear sounded that it was safe to come out, and our house wasn't there anymore. It had a direct hit, and had we been in the house, we'd have all been killed.
So you went and you left London when the bombs started falling.
Yes.
And when did you come back? Did you come back after the war had finished?
Oh, no.
Now, the funny thing was the whole family moved to Surrey. They thought it was safer out there, so we rented a house in, it was Middlesex. No, it wasn't, it was Surrey. Hook. It was a place called Hook, near Kingston. And the whole family moved out there.
Was it safe in the countryside?
So a lot safer than London. You still got the occasional bomb, but not like you did in London.
So when did you actually come back to London?
Well,
when the war finished, I think.
No, you couldn't. I don't think you were away for the duration.
I can't remember.
What we did, you see, my grandmother, she was obviously an elderly lady. It was my mother's mother, and she lived with us. And as soon as the bomb started, the first thing in my mother's mind was to put my grandmother and I out of London, for safety's sake. So we went to Leeds in Yorkshire. The only reason I think we went up to Leeds, okay, it was safer up there, but the fact was also there was relatives, family, distant cousins living up there, and we went to stay with them. But we were only up there for most probably about a year or so. Then we came back to London.
So when you came back to London, the bombs were still falling?
The bombs were worse. I mean, then they weren't concentrating on the docks then. A year later, they concentrated on the civilian population, because what the Germans wanted to do was to defeat England with fear. In other words, if they dropped enough bombs and killed enough people, then they honestly believed that Churchill would actually, he was the Prime Minister at the time, try and create a peace treaty with them.
I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but during the war, my father was an ambulance driver, and he was a very good ambulance driver. He used to drive all through the night, picking up the injured and dead and taking them to hospital, and he was so good, I've got a certificate of merit for him.
Really?
Of course, he's dead now, but he was very good. And my sister used to work on the telephone. She used to be a telephonist, emergencies for the ambulance people.
So what was the feeling among the people in the country at the time, or in London?
Good. Very good. It was, everybody spoke to everybody. Everybody wanted to know. Everybody wanted to know if you were okay.
They'd give you blankets and food
if you had enough, whatever. I mean, we basically, in Mile End Road, which is East London, there was a very big brewery, the manufacturers of beer. They were known as Charringtons. And beneath their building, because it was a huge factory actually, beneath their building, they had deep cellars where they used to store empty barrels, you know. And when the bombing got so bad and people had to go into shelters, because, see, there was various places you could go and get shelter. You could go into a London Underground
stations, we used to, yes.
And sleep on the platform.
The stores in the West End.
Or there was like maybe stores in the West End. I can remember that there was a synagogue at the back of London Hospital, which was a very big hospital. And in the synagogue, they had deep cellars. and people used to go down there.
And that would protect you from the bombs?
Oh yeah, you got away from the bombing.
I remember sleeping in the underground stations, masses of people sleeping, the trains coming in and going out and people were sleeping, and the man used to come round with a trolley with coffee and tea
Sandwiches.
and cakes and sandwiches.
Well, in Charrington Shelter, we called it Charrington Shelter, that would house anything up to something like about 300 people.
So the trains were still running?
Trains
yeah.
were still running.
The trains had to
underground
run.
trains, yes.
The only problem you had is in the morning when the early workers
You had to be out
came in
early.
to get into work, they had trouble climbing over the sleeping bodies to get off the platform.
If you went to sleep in the underground, you had to be up and out very early before the
before the
commuters
rush hour
started.
started, yeah.
Was there enough food?
We were rationed.
we
we
had
didn't
ration
starve,
books.
but we didn't know any different.
We had ration books
You
with
never had
bread
eggs. You never had eggs.
You never had milk. You had powdered milk and powdered eggs. Never had fresh eggs. And then later on we had clothes coupons. We couldn't buy clothes unless we had coupons for them. And once your coupons had gone, you couldn't buy any more clothes. You had to wait until the following year to get some more coupons.
So when you look back, do you think of it as a positive experience?
Oh yes.
Experience you never forget.
It's one you don't forget, but not only that, it was the greatest experience you would have in your life of somebody being kind to you. Because everybody was in the same boat. Everybody knew that possibly that day that you were with them could be your last day, because that night you could be in the way of a bomb.
When my father and my sister used to come home from work from the ambulance and the telephone people, for early in the morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, they used to have to step over dead bodies in the street.
Really?
Yeah, they were all dead bodies they used to step over, that the ambulance men couldn't come and get them in time. Terrible.
One night, when the height of the bombing, when it was at its peak, 32,000 people got killed or were killed by bombs in central London. And when you think that central London is something like about 4 miles square, 32,000 people got killed.
Do you remember seeing dead bodies in the streets?
Yeah. I came home from school one day and my mother sent me to the top of the road where the shops were to get something, and the sirens went, and the guy in the shop, it was a sweet shop, and the guy in the shop turned and said, "Don't go home." He said, "Don't go home because you might, hurt yourself." Sort of thing. So I stayed in the sweet shop for a little while, and during that time a bomb had fallen something like about 100 yards away and completely demolished 2 or 3 houses. And as I came out the sweet shop and walked along the street back to the house, there was a person laying on the pavement, and the top of a tin, the round, when you open a tin of peaches or pears, the top of a tin was in his back. It was like a knife. The blast of the bomb lifted this bit of tin and it went straight into his back, and he was laying on the floor dead.
Yeah. I remember having to take my mother's mother, my grandmother was blind, and we used to take her to the West End about 5 o'clock in the afternoon before the sirens sounded to go into a departmental store for safety. And I remember having to take her on the underground, and it was terrible trying to get her to walk along because she couldn't see anything. Mm-hmm. That was when the doodlebugs were around.
Well,
they were planes when the lights went out. People used to stand in the street and watch these aeroplanes, and they had a little light on the back. And people used to look up at the sky, and when the light went out on the planes, it was a bomb. It used to drop. And my mother very often pulled me in the shelter. I was out there watching for them.
And you remember these bombs falling?
Yeah. We used to count them. We used to get up to about 3, and the bomb used to fall when the light went out.
They were like rockets. This light that Mum was talking about was the flames coming out the back. They were rockets, and they were known as V2s. And as soon as the
doodlebugs,
as soon as the light went out, then they would drop to the ground. And the first night, because I think there was something like about 30 fell on London, And that first night, they killed 22,000 people, those bombs.
And the British couldn't shoot them down.
Well, yeah, they used to shoot a lot of them down coming over the channel.
Well, they had the barrage balloons, didn't they?
And then they had barrage balloons to try and catch them.
That was like a balloon made of nylon, and German aeroplanes used to go into them and couldn't get out and used to fall.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.
You're welcome.
Any time that we can give you a little bit of history.
Thank you for listening to this interview. There are many more podcasts on inglespodcast.com and listening comprehension exercises at different levels in the listening section at matchandingles.com.